Hi everyone, thank you for coming to register for SMSUK's Working in the UK talk. If you haven't yet, please change your Zoom name to include your full name and medicine or dentistry. This will help us allocate you to the right breakout room later. We would also appreciate it if you could please keep your microphones muted for the duration of this event. Good morning or evening, distinguished speakers and SMSUK members. We'll be making a start on our program now. My name is Andrew, the Executive Secretary of SMSUK, and I'll host you this event today. Whether you're tuning in from the UK or Singapore, on behalf of SMSUK, we welcome you to our Working in the UK talk. This event is brought to you by SMSUK, planned by Ping Ting, our Vice President, Zhe Ting, our Preclinical Education Officer, Lian, our Clinical Dental Officer, and myself. For those of you who have just joined us, please be reminded to change your Zoom name to your full name and medicine or dentistry. So for me, it would be Andrew Ho Medicine, for example. And please also be reminded to keep your mics muted during the talk. SMS UK is extremely excited to be holding this event this year, as we will not only be looking over medical pathways, but also dental pathways in the UK. It has been organized for SMS UK members and other interested parties alike to learn more about being a doctor or dentist in the UK from a Singaporean perspective, with a focus on the different career pathways available in the UK. We understand that some of you may be exploring the option of working or living in the UK after graduation, and this event hopes to offer tips as well as to address any concerns that you may have. Before we move on to the sharings, we would like to invite Mr. Henry Tan, who is the Group CEO and Chief Innovation Officer of CLA Global TS, to give us a talk about financial accounting and the medical profession. Founded in 1993, CLA Global TS, formerly known as Nexia TS, is an award-winning Asia-centered business advisor. An independent member firm of CLA Global Network, CLA TS provides a full spectrum of professional services, including, but not limited to, assurance and IPO reporting, tax, risk, advisory, valuation, insolvency and restructuring, sustainability, and climate change advisory, and more. Mr. Henry Tan has been serving as advisor to clients in Singapore and the region since 1993. He has worked on various aspects of valuation advisory for mergers and acquisitions and assisted startups, especially fintech and blockchain companies, through IPO, business plan, accounting, and other advisory. Mr. Tan also sits on the board of several listed and non-listed companies. Mr. Tan, please.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for the invitation. I will just have my slide shared first. So many would be asking, what has financial got to do with medicine? And I hope that in the short presentation that I'm going to do, it will give you a bit of insight to that. And we'll then finish off with perhaps a very short question and answers if there is any question. So the topics that I will take you through quite quickly is what has financial accounting got to do with medical professionals, health of your medical business through the eyes of accounting, and making sense of financial reporting to support your medical practice, and also practical accounting application to deliver growth and future sustainability. So the first part, what has financial accounting got to do with medical profession? I think medicine, just like any other profession, is also a business. We know of hospitals that are run as a big hospital, and that is run like business. We have a smaller practice like a medical clinic, a dental clinics, that is also run like a business. And the accounting is a language of business. Just like medicine, when you see a patient or someone who comes through the door, you want to know the health of the patient, and there are some symptoms, there are some telltale signs or things that reveals. Similarly, to understand the financial health, there are the numbers that will talk and tell and review about the financial health of those business. And the medical professional will need to understand accounting in order to understand the financial health of this medical practice. Even if you are not running a medical practice, but while working in a hospital in future, one day you would be holding management roles. It would therefore require you to understand accounting. So I hope to just share a bit of this in advance. So accounting monitors 4 vital signs. And if you see this, it looks almost exactly the same like a medical. You measure the body temperature, the pulse rate, the respiration rate, blood pressure, just like a medical profession. So regularly monitoring maintains and improves the health of your medical practice. And I will also share with you that, for example, some of the signs that we need to look for in terms of the profitability of the practice, in terms of the cash flow that's available. And that's almost like the blood flowing through the company, very much like flowing through our human being. So some of these financial data include, for example, revenue growth. It's important to know that how is the profession doing in terms of the hospital or your clinics, how is it doing in terms of the revenue? And also we need to know about the cost side, which is that how much does it cost for each patient case? And when this cost is involved, it can include direct costs, that means the medicine, the things that you use, the equipments, and also indirect costs, for example, the overhead, the rental, and maybe admin support, and clinicians, and also the clinic supervisors and all this. At the same time, we'll also be interested in medical equipment utilization. So for example, if a clinic invests into very sophisticated medical equipment, but realize that the utilization is actually low, what it means is that your recovery on all this investment that you have made is not able to be justified. And it's not just about making profit, but it also means that you may need to find other ways to renew your equipment if you are not able to generate enough utilization for your old equipment. And there's this term called EBITDA, which is actually earnings before income, we call it interest, tax, and also amortization or depreciation. And that is a very important figure to look at, which essentially records your profitability. And I will just talk about it a bit later on. So as we look at this, we know that if we know these financial data, you improve our insights planning. We also can detect fraud, misuse of funds, and of course allow faster as well as right decision making. And to just share some examples, for example, if a clinic or a hospital is spending sufficient amount of R&D and innovation, that would mean that it will have a future sustainability. But at the same time, of course, if you spend money in R&D and innovation, there may not be immediate return in terms of the revenue because it takes a while to do research. So business or medical practice or medical institution will need to balance this amount of investment in R&D and innovation versus the amount of expenses that you spend to generate immediate income. The other thing that I think is also very important is, for example, the right pricing and costing, because if the fees are charged too high, perhaps it may not be able to attract enough persons or patients to come on board. But if it's charged too low, we may not be able to offer the quality of medical health care that is necessary. So accounting puts a value to the business, and accounting generates key inputs that's required in that valuation model. So for example, your gross annual revenue, your cost, your intangible assets, and didn't mention earlier, but the cost we have mentioned. Example, goodwill, brand name, as well as tangible assets, example, medical equipment. And we cannot underestimate, for example, intangible assets, as you can see, if a particular medical practice or institution, or perhaps a hospital, sometimes a name just mentioned about that hospital, people just associate that with quality healthcare. And hence, that intangible assets, if you are building a practice, is also very important. So what has this got to do with medical profession? Because it is the business language to communicate the financial health. It monitors the vital signs of your business, and it puts value on your medical practice. And that was what I had covered earlier. So the health of your medical practice through the eyes of accounting. So there's basically four primary financial health statements and notes disclosure. Most of us as in the medical profession or trying to see a doctor, one of the key things that you always do is a blood test. And then the lab results comes out, and then you have this section that talks about your cholesterol, that section talks about something else and something else. So in a way, the financial statements is like different parts of that section, but somehow when it's linked together, it tells what a full story. Of course, in terms of a medical report, it tells a full story about a person's health, but in terms of what we are saying here, it tells the full story of the financial health of that business. So the balance sheet is the one that reports what are some of the assets and the liabilities. Assets will include your medical equipment. If you have bought a building or hospital, then that comes under assets and liability. If you have actually borrowed money to buy those things, then that is under your liabilities, or any things that you are owing to, that's a liability. The income statement essentially records based on your income that you receive from the patient, and then expenses that are related, which can include the expenses of the nurses and doctors and other items. And the net figure will be your profitability. Now, the statement of changes then reports what has changed between one period to the other. It's accumulation of what is in the balance sheet. But one thing that is very important, which I will equate with our blood flow, is the cash flow. Because any business, including a medical business, without cash flow is like a person without blood flowing through the body. And we all know what would happen. So it is very important when you manage a practice to manage your cash flow. Sometimes it could seem to be very profitable, but because, for example, we allow many corporate clients to have long outstanding amounts that is not paid to us, that will affect our cash flow, because we know that for the doctors, for the nurses, we have to pay them every month. So it's important about managing cash flow. So it communicates medical practice, health, performance, availability, and accounting is like a building block of these financial statements. Then it generates numbers, and a healthy financial statements indicates a profitable practice, growth potential, and also attracts investors' money, which in turn can enable research, innovation, and growth. So for example, if someone is building up a medical clinic or a series of medical clinic, they need to be able to show all this profitability before you can attract others. Some, of course, go through the route of listing their companies, listing their medical practice, and then, of course, they get investors to put money in. And this, in turn, can be put into research, innovation, and growth. And similarly, the pharmaceutical companies, that's what they do exactly as well. So if we look at the operating cash flow, the measured amount of cash generated from normal operations excludes income expense from investment, indicates whether practice generates sufficient cash to sustain operation and growth. Positive OCF, which stands for operating cash flow, means it's healthy status. So even if we have a lot of income arising from investment that we place, and this gets interest income, dividend income, But if the regular operation of the hospital or of the clinic doesn't generate enough to cover the expense, then it is not considered healthy. Because what it means is that you will need to get more funding to sustain the operations. And another item that perhaps you need to look at is the net profit margin. So for example, if you're running a practice, then if you take the income minus expense, that is your net profit. If that net profit divided by the income, or you call it revenue, times 100, that is the percentage that shows you your profitability. So for example, if it is a 20% margin versus something that's 30% margin, it obviously means that the 30% margin is higher and more profitable. And it is important because it also is a reflection of essentially how much profit per dollar of revenue you are generating. And positive net profit margin means a healthy business. So beside those other indicators we indicated, we also talk about something like revenue indicators, EBITDA, which I explained already. The gearing ratio is to do with your debt ratio. So debt over equity, that means how much money you borrow versus how much money it is from your capital. That shows how much leverage you are doing in your business. Of course, total expense, labor expense, as well as earnings per share that you have will also shows the various other KPIs. It is very important for us to know that it is crucial to understand financial health, and bad accounting deflects from good decision making. Of course, good accounting provides direction for right business decision. So in other words, also, if you use maybe a vision, good accounting is a 2020 vision, and it's perfect vision. So all can go through this lens and understand perfectly how the medical profession and medical practice is doing. But if it's bad accounting, or even delayed accounting because your numbers are not up, one cannot run a practice well, and that is causing blur in vision. And the next one is making sense of financial reporting to support your medical practice and understanding the financial reports. So the purpose of financial report, I think earlier we did say, is to show you the status. I use the example of the lab report, lab results. So already mentioned about all these items, so we can move on. So usually the fundamental part of financial statements is that there is a basis that you prepare your financial statements, and some of these details you may not need to know in detail, but it's also good for you to know there is a set of financial reporting standards, just perhaps like you have a set of medical standards or medical expectation of practice requirement. Then we have also assumptions that is put in place. For example, we assume that the entity is on a going concern, means that it's continuing all the time and not expected to end at one point in time. And of course, we look at what we call accrual basis accounting versus cash basis. What it means is that instead of us only recording items based on actual cash spent, if we have already received an item but we have not yet paid, we still need to accrue it, as what you call here, or recognize it in the financial statements as an expense. So that's the called accrual basis versus cash basis. And just now, earlier, I also mentioned about what is a complete set of financial statements. Now, usually, financial statements, after it's prepared, they also would ask an auditor to look at it and also provide an opinion. And so what is that report? It is an opinion to provide true and fair view of the financial position. So much like someone coming to a doctor, or maybe more closer linkage could be one who do a yearly full body checkup, to going through the various stations, doing the ECG, doing the various things, so in a way that auditor look at the overall picture and see whether it gives a true and fair situation of the financial health of this organization. And that is what an auditor do. And who are these auditors? I mean, of course, we are one of those firms, but there are other professional accounting firms, and they conduct audit. In Singapore will be under the Singapore Standard of Auditing, or internationally will be International Standards of Auditing. And lastly, I think to look at the practical accounting application to develop growth and future sustainability, we can look at the next one. So from a financials perspective, it's important to know that we need to have proper internal controls. We need to have information processing activities, accounting system, IT, and cybersecurity. And we hear so many things about cybersecurity in particular, or even leakage of database. So if you are running a medical institution or practice, that is areas that you have to look at, and that are all linked up as part of controls and accounting. So just a quick case study. This is a case study on IHH, Healthcare Financial Highlights. On the left, you could see, for example, there are revenue tables by business unit. You have Parkway Pantai, you have the XC Berdam Holdings, then IMU Health, and P Life REIT. And next to it is the EBITDA, which is the profit figure. And looking at it, I wonder whether you know which particular business unit is more profitable. If you haven't found out, I think the hint would be it's not the highest revenue one, because for a revenue of close to 12 billion, they make 2.9 billion profit, which is right. But something like the P Life REIT, it has 370 million revenue, but it makes 349 million. So therefore, that is the more profitable business in terms of percentage margin. But of course, in terms of absolute number, it's still the 2.9 billion. So this is just one example of how one uses the financials to look at things. On the right-hand side, you can actually see, once it's tabulated across, you can actually tell that, for example, this entity, IHH Healthcare, their performance by geographic. So you will be asking, this IHH, which is mainly Parkway Group, how are they performing in Singapore, Malaysia, India, China, and maybe other countries? Which are the best performing countries? And I hope you would already realize that it must be that in 2021, which is the last column, it shows clearly that Singapore has performed very, very well in terms of medical practice and recovery from, I suppose, this is part of the time where it is still during the COVID pandemic time. As compared to, say, Malaysia, there's slight recovery from 2.1 billion to 2.7. And then in Greater China, slight improvement, but for other things, it's actually quite minimal. So this is one example of how you evaluate the medical profession, how it is doing vis-a-vis the various years. At the same time, imagine if you also have other healthcare businesses, financial statements, you actually can start doing a lot of benchmarking against comparable in the industry. So it is quite useful to do that. And I think you can also look further down. For example, there's one item called return on equity. And it ranges from, say, in 2017, it's about 4.42%, then it dropped to 2.86, 2.49, then even lower, 1.31. And in 2021, it's 8.43. So it means that based on the equity you have, or you like your capital, this is the kind of return you are getting from this business. Now, one would be able to simply say, for example, should I put my money in fixed deposit, which earns, try to this about 0.5%, because nowadays you can get 2 to 3 or even 3.5%. Should you put into pure fixed deposit, which has less risk, or do you put your investment into this entity, which generates at one time only 1.31%? Of course, now it's at 8.43. So that is the way that people or investors look at in terms of the practice or in terms of the organization. The next one, please. So in terms of sustainability, I think it's very important that we look at this clinic or this financial organization in various capital. One is a financial capital, which is plays a very important part of the organization, and it is actually a summary of all the other capital that's mentioned here. What is manufactured capital would be things like the tools, the equipment that are used to produce the production process or the organization practice. And then we have the human capital, which is like the people's health, knowledge, skills, your motivation, and these are important to be productive. You cannot overwork, for example, all your nurses and all your doctors. There's lack of human capital. Intellectual capital, I think, is very straightforward, which is what are some of the intangibles, what are some of the research, what are some of the, including branding as well, those are in intellectual capital. And not forgetting social and relation capital, which includes a broader aspects of, for example, families, communities, and other people that are involved around this business. And finally, the natural capital, which will be the resources that is being used, whether it's renewable resources or non-renewable resources, and things that affect, for example, climate. So when we look at a business, we look at overall perspective of that business and how is it contributing to sustainability. So if you look at YHL per se, they talk about, you should trust, you should have see that we are touching lives, we care for good. And inside there is trust and synergy. You might say, okay, that has less to do with financials. But then if you look at growth and you look at sustainability, that has everything to do with financial as well as the sustainability that we just earlier talked about, which shows you how important it is for medical students, medical future career people, or dentistry people to understand financials as well as sustainability. And thank you so much. And if you like to connect with us, this is the details, but I think we can also take a few questions.
Thank you, Mr. Tan, for the expert tips and advice. We would also like to take this opportunity to thank CLA Global TS for their kind sponsorship of SMSUK and this event. If you have any questions for Mr. Tan, please feel free to unmute yourself or type it in the Zoom chat if you would prefer, and we'll read it out for you. Yes, so we have a question from Mr. Jeffrey Lim. He asks when you would recommend junior doctors to engage in a professional accountant on returning to Singapore. So for example, is it as soon as possible or when we finish our specialty training?
Oh, thanks. I think it was Jeffrey. Yeah. Thanks for the question. I suppose the question, perhaps, if you are still not running a practice, like you're not starting up a medical clinic or dentistry clinic, then I think at that moment you don't have to engage a professional accountant, because for your own purpose, it's more for maybe tax filing, which especially for Singapore, it will be quite straightforward. You should be able to file based on the IRA returns that you get from the organization that you work with. But if you are thinking of setting up a practice, medical clinic, then I think you should engage it before you set up so that you get the right advice.
Thanks for your answer, Mr. Tan. Do we have any other questions? Yeah, so I think we'll move on to our next segment since you're running a bit short of time. Thank you so much, Mr. Tan, for your talk
Thank
and
you so much. Thank
your
you.
insight. Thank you. So before we split into our breakout rooms for medicine and dentistry, we would like to take a group photo with everyone.
Quite a lot of that, and you do things like reduction as well. And when you're SHO on call nights, at least for my hospital, you have a lot of independence because the reg is offsite because they do 24-hour calls and they definitely do not want to be woken up unless it's limb or life threatening. So the only things that we usually call them for are aquarial compartment syndrome, neck fash, or things like displaced pediatric supracondylar fractures. We might need to be taken to theaters overnight. So yeah, this is one of the reductions I've done at like 2 a.m. in the morning, distal radius fracture, give a nice pull under sedation in ED and put it in a cast. It was open fracture, so it had to be operated the next morning. So things like that, you do get better over time as a SHO. So just some realities of working in the UK. So you do 40 to 40 hours on average a week. And unlike Singapore, you don't have 36 hours on call, which I really appreciate. I don't think I will be able to survive given that I am already so sort of culturally assimilated into the UK. I don't think I can do a 36 hours on call. Never done it before. And the pay depends on the number of call. I tend to be quite transparent how much you would be earning as a doctor. It is quite low, unfortunately, in the UK. I've opted out of pension as well as I want to go home after ICCT. So this is how much I've been earning for the last 4 rotations monthly. And you do have capacity for locum. And as an F1, you can only locum in the specialty you have worked in your own hospital. So Pan London rates are really low and it's quite universal across all London hospitals. And Tunbridge Wells is counted as outside of London as we're in Kent. So the rates are a lot higher. And the SHOs, we sort of banded together. And for nights, we have actually managed to push the locum rate up to £80 an hour, which is really, really high for SHO. So some questions that were sent to us in the email, I'm just going to answer it here straight away. Why did I choose to work in UK compared to back home in Singapore? For me, main thing is a personal reason. My girlfriend stayed in medical school. So both of us are planning to just finish our training and then go back to Singapore. And we are already well accustomed to the culture and the medical system here. And application into surgical training, at least to my eye, before getting in, I'm pretty sure the trainees might have something different to say. It does look like it's a level playing field. Portfolio is 30%, interview 60%. And this year, there's something new for surgical training, which is MSRA. Usually they use that for GP application radiology, but it's another exam that we'll have to take in the middle of January, and that forms 10% of the application score. And I do think that there's a healthier work-life balance in terms of hours. I still manage to do quite a lot of my hobbies outside of academia as well. So what are some challenges that I faced working in the UK? The biggest thing is just traveling, because I live in London and I do travel every day for work. So I travel about an hour, 40 minutes every morning to and from Tunbridge Wells Hospital. And even for training, you can be uprooted to quite different and far corners of the UK. And when you're raising a family, I can see how that can be quite difficult as compared to Singapore, where you can easily sort of return home no matter which hospital you are sort of training or specializing in. And the other question was, what's the importance of research publication when applying for specialty training? I think it's very important just because in the portfolio, a huge number of points are allocated to publications. This is the portfolio for core surgical training. You need to be a first author for a PubMed cited publication to get 10 points, which is a maximum for this segment. This is the portfolio for run-through trauma and orthopedic training in Scotland, whereby you can see publication presentations and other research indicators are all, they sort of compose 3 main parts in of themselves, and to get the maximum number of points, you need to be first authors for systematic reviews and stuff. And this is specialty training for TNO as a ST3. And basically, you need as many first author papers as you can to get as many points as you can, because there is no upper limit here. So the more papers that you have as a first author, the better it will be, the higher chances that you have. So I do have some surgical research opportunities available for systematic review and meta-analysis. Essentially, if anyone's interested in applying for surgery in the future and you would like to get involved in systematic reviews, meta-analysis, or you like to write basically papers and be first author, you can just email me and I'll get you in touch with the relevant people. So yeah, thank you. That is the end of my talk.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tsang, for sharing your experiences in medical school and of the foundation year program. I'm sure that some of our members are thinking about staying in the UK and they've learned much from your presentation. I think especially the part about all the matrices. It's quite important. Let me share my screen. Yes. Next, we have Dr. Khoo Hui Fen today. Dr. Khoo graduated from UCL in 2020. She did her FY1 in Barnet and FY2 in Royal Free in the UK. She is currently a core surgical trainee 1 in Queen's. She will be speaking on her experiences in foundation training and surgical training in the UK as a Singaporean doctor. Dr. Khoo, please.
Oh, hi. So I'm Hui Fen. I'm not as organized as Zhang Yi, so I don't actually have any slides. So I'll just be talking quite informally and quite like freehand about my experiences, I think. So I'm Hui Fen. I'm currently a core surgical trainee in Queen's Hospital, which is in Northeast London. And I'm currently doing general surgery. So my core surgical kind of trainee job is 2 years of general surgery in Queen's and King George Hospital, essentially. And to provide some background, I went to UCL, graduated in 2020. Then I did foundation year in North Central East London, which is the name of the foundation school. And I did F1 in Barnet Hospital. I did acute medicine, endocrine, general surgery. And then in F2, I went to Royal Free Hospital, which is the same trust. And I did obs and gynae, ICU, and GP. And I think the general structure of kind of foundation years is that F1 tends to be quite general medical and surgical specialties. Then F2, everyone does like things like GP, A&E, and then more of the niche specialties, things like obs and gynae, people do trauma and orthopedics, some people do like peds. So that tends to be the kind of the general structure of foundation year, though I think it differs quite a lot across the country. So I remember one of my consultants, one of my favorite ICU consultants that I worked with once told me that the best career advice he was given was not to take career advice from anyone, which I really agree with, because I think that everyone has, different priorities, different values, things that work for them at different times of their life. So, and it's hard to like contextualize what people's decisions in their kind of, especially if you don't know them, you can't contextualize their life decisions. But I do think that it's never a bad thing to kind of get more information about things, especially with this. I remember when I was a medical student, I attended one of similar talks that SMSUK organized, because I was feeling quite stressed about having to make like big life decisions, things like whether I wanted to sign the MOHH bond. I think I was like 4th year at that time. And I was like, I don't even know anything about working in Singapore or the UK. How can I make such decisions? So hopefully I can provide some information, but it's very much from my personal experience and I can't speak for other people. So in terms of kind of quite chronologically, what happened was, I think around that time, 4th, 5th year, I was thinking about whether I wanted to, sign the bond or not. At that point, I was not 100% sure, but I was quite surgically inclined. And from just the information I was sharing from people in Singapore, it seemed like it was quite difficult to get into surgical training in Singapore. Because of the bottleneck at the top. So they're taking very few residents into training. I think things might have changed slightly now, I'm not very sure. But I was thinking at that point to keep my options open, I wouldn't sign a bond. And I was like quite lucky that my parents were supportive of that decision. So and I guess the secondary reason was I'm quite like an outdoorsy person. I'm quite like active. I like the freedom and the lifestyle here. So then at that point I was like, I think I won't sign a bond. So that's what happened. And then in final year, I graduated. I think there were 9 Singaporeans in my year in UCL. 4 of them went back to Singapore and 5 of us are still here. I think it's a combination of reasons. The 4 people who went back all had partners in Singapore. So I think that was a big reason. and 5 of us who stayed here. We are, I guess we were more, we were, I think out of the 4 people who went back, some of them would have liked to stay if not for the fact that their partners were in Singapore. But that's how it worked out. So then in F1 and F2, generally it was, I think overall it was a very enjoyable experience for me. In F1, I did it in we call it a district general hospital, which is kind of a hospital it's not a big like teaching hospital in central London. So the hospital is much smaller. There are much fewer like specialized teams, and you see a lot of the common conditions. The hospital is much smaller, you know everybody, so you rotate through kind of a lot of the general medical specialties. My hospital was basically general medicine. There were very few other specialized teams. So by the end of the year, you kind of felt like you knew the whole hospital, and it was a very nice, friendly experience, good place to kind of start your medical journey. And then at F2, I did much more niche jobs. I think I learned a lot on each of them. And then after that, so in F2, around this time, I was applying for my core surgical job. So I was thinking about whether to stay in London or to go out of London, because I heard that, so in surgery, you kind of want, as Zhang was mentioning, you want lots of numbers, high volume to build up your experience in surgery. It's a very practical thing. So you just need time in theater essentially. And from what I heard, in London, you can sometimes not get a lot of time in theater because the bosses like to be in theater. So I was talking to a few seniors and they said that, because all my registrars that I knew from F1 obviously trained in London. So they couldn't really provide another alternative kind of experience. But they said that generally, if you want to stay in London, you probably should apply to hospitals that are not in central London, essentially. So on balance, I was like, okay, I training might be better outside of London, but for my personal life, all my friends are in London, my support system's all in London. I decided I wouldn't want to leave London. So I ranked jobs that were in London, but in the peripheries of London. And I heard Queen's Hospital was, quite busy, quite a high volume, quite a chaotic hospital. So I decided to rank that quite highly. I wasn't 100% sure I wanted to do general surgery, but I wanted, so most of the core surgical jobs these days are themed, I think at least in England. So they are all at least 50% of the time. So at least 1 year would be in one specialty. So if you want to do orthopedics, you probably should choose an orthopedic themed core surgical training job so that you have enough numbers to apply for your ST3 job in orthopedics. So I wanted a general surgery team job. And actually, if you look at kind of general surgery team jobs in London, there are probably like maybe 15 to 20. I think I can't remember exactly, but not a huge number. And once I kind of ruled out the ones that had central London jobs, then there actually weren't that many left. So that's how it ended up. So that's why I'm now in Queen's Hospital doing general surgery for 2 years. So I guess I'll be doing general surgery. And so to kind of talk generally about the differences between working in Singapore and in the UK, I mean, I have never worked in Singapore, so I can't really provide an experience, experience in that sense. But I guess I have quite a lot of friends that are doctors in Singapore. A few of my friends who went back to Singapore after doing F1 here. And my brother's a doctor in Singapore. So I guess I have, just based on what they tell me, my inferences are that, so as Zhang mentioned, I think one of the pros of working in UK is that definitely we have much better work-life balance. So we work maybe 40 to 50 to 60 hours per week. Whereas in Singapore, it sounds like they work like 60 to 90 hours a week. They do 36-hour on calls, like Zhang mentioned. We only do maximum like 13-hour on calls. I actually have no idea how they do such long calls, but maybe Joanna can explain later. And I think one other thing is that I think so this one I'm not very sure, but some people say that, when you an F1 compared to maybe like a PGY1 in Singapore, there's more expected of the PGY1s in Singapore. I think some of my friends are quite worried about going back to Singapore, maybe after graduating or after F1, whether they will be able to like get used to the system in Singapore, which seems much more, they expect a lot more. But I think that shouldn't be a huge factor. Like, I think that seems like most of my friends who went back, initially, obviously, they're teething problems. They don't know how to use the system. They are not familiar with some of like the guidelines, which are a bit different. But like that can easily be learned. I think that people shouldn't worry about that if that's one of the main things they're concerned about. I think another thing that is a pro of staying here, I think, is that as I mentioned earlier, when I initially made my decision to stay here, is that the competition ratios, I think in Singapore are probably still higher, and Singapore is a small country. So it's all the applications are quite subjective, especially in things like competitive specialties like orthopedics. The waiting times to get the training can be very long. So one of my friends who graduated in my year wants to do orthopedics. He's still, he hasn't gotten the training yet. And he tells me that there's kind of like an informal waiting list within the department about, people who have been waiting longer will get to first. And obviously you cannot piss off the bosses as well. If you piss them off, then the word goes around, you probably can't get into any training program anywhere in Singapore. Whereas here, it's very, it's a very nationalized process. There's a point system, there's interviews, which can be a bad thing, because I think sometimes, some people are good at gaming the system, they can get good portfolios, but people obviously don't know you, and people who are not necessarily good doctors or good people can get into training. But that's how it is. So if you play the game, you can probably get the training, especially if you're not like hung up about where exactly you want to be in the country. You can probably get in somewhere quite easily, I think. So then obviously the cons about staying in the UK, one big thing I would say is the poor pay, as Changi mentioned. So there's like the pay doesn't increment that much either, even when you reach consultant. And the taxes are really high here. So my take-home salary now is like a CT1. I haven't opted out of the pension. So my take-home is about, well, my last paycheck was like 2.9K, which is still quite low. Like, I think my friends who work in Singapore at this level, so like post-graduation, third year, I think in Singapore they're earning about like 5-point-something thousand, which the cost of living equivalent would be much better in Singapore. They're basically earning like almost double what we earn. And at consultant, I haven't fully asked them how much they earn there, but here I think it's still quite low. It's about 80,000, I think, a year, something like that, which means, yeah, it doesn't actually go up that much more even as a consultant. Another downside of working in the UK, I think, is that, generally you're working in the NHS, which is a very stretched and broken system. And sometimes it can be really frustrating because it's like really long wait. I mean, everybody knows that the morale now is horrible. Doctors want to go on strike. The patients are obviously really frustrated. There's long waiting times. You have to, bear the brunt of frustrated patients. Sometimes you can't really blame them, but, the whole system is broken. The IT is horrible. I was shocked. I went to my hospital and they're still using paper notes. And even when the parts that are not paper, so it's even worse because the notes are on paper. You can't read anybody's handwriting. The paper's like falling out of the files. Then you need to log into the computer, which takes half an hour to turn on, to check the various things. Like there's one system for bloods, one system for ops, one system for images, one system for like looking at previous documents like clinic letters and things like that. And the system is just so disorganized. And things like locuming, as Changi mentioned, in F1 and F2 when I locumed, they would take me like months and months and months to pay me. They would take ages they'll pay me the wrong amounts. I have to chase them. It's almost like, is it worth locuming when it takes so much more effort to chase the money back? So yeah, that's a huge downside, I think. I don't know what's like in Singapore, but I would imagine Singapore is a very efficient place that hopefully some of these things at least will be better. I know they definitely don't use paper notes for one. And then the last thing that another point is that I guess like Zhang mentioned, the training is quite long here. So I think for general surgery at least it's like up to ST8. And so there's 8 years in training on top of 2 years in foundation 1 and 2. And it seems like most of the people who want to become consultants here, these days you need like a PhD to get. I'm not sure if that is a requirement outside of London, but I think in London, most of the registrars have PhDs because that's the way it is now. And so that means the training is extremely long. You don't have, especially without run-through jobs these days, it also means that you can be thrown to various parts of the country. There's no assurance about kind of if you want to like settle down, plan your life. It's quite difficult because every few years you need to reapply to a different training program that could be anywhere in the country. And there's things like healthcare is quite like a political issue. So they keep changing what they want to do. They keep changing the training program lengths. And it seems like they keep wanting to make things longer because they want to, help with service provision in the NHS. So I think that's a big thing. Obviously there are issues with I'm sure there are similar issues in Singapore as well, but that's just what it is like in here in UK. And obviously the last thing is staying here. There's your family is back in Singapore, and like lots of your friends may have gone back to Singapore. There's obviously issues with whether your personal life about how that place affected and whether you want to stay or go back essentially. So yeah, that's all I have to say at the moment. If you guys want to ask me any specific questions, I'm open to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Koo, for sharing your journey and perspective with everyone. I found it very interesting about the pros and cons of being in Singapore or UK. So next up we have Dr. Jolinda Ang. Dr. Ang graduated from Cambridge in 2018. She did her FY1 at Watford, which is in Northwest London, in general surgery, hematology and psychiatry. She subsequently returned to Singapore as a medical officer in general surgery. Currently, she is a medical officer in ophthalmology. As a gentle reminder, should you have any questions, please post or upvote them in the Slido link, which you can see the QR code on the slide. Dr. Ang, please.
I think you need to stop sharing the screen.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, can you see my slides? All right. So hi, I'm Jolinda. I'll be sharing a bit about my timeline. So I did an undergrad before my medical degree, and then I went to Cambridge for my medical degree. And I did my FY1 in Northwest London. It was general surgery, and where I got to rotate every month. So I did 1 month of colorectal, 1 month of urology, and 1 month of vascular also. And then I went to hematology. And my final posting was in Radford in psychiatry, which was really enjoyable. When I came back, if you come back as a F2, you need to do 6 months of general medicine and 6 months of general surgery. So I did this 2 rotations. I ended up staying for 1 year in general medicine because of COVID, so it was quite long. And then after that, I went into ophthalmology. Yeah. Okay, so what to expect working as a doctor, a Singaporean doctor in NHS. I really loved my experience in London. Everyone was very friendly. I had a very good work-life balance and a good I like the shift work also. So most of the time after you can hand over to your colleagues, and most of the time you can go home around 6 or 7. There's a good work-life balance, and there's a good mix of postings to choose from too. So you can choose a good mix of like medical, surgical, and there are a lot of different postings that you can choose from. So I think you can just ask around when you're choosing the postings and choose one that fits your career and life goals. There are a lot of inefficiencies. I think the paper notes is one, and sometimes in Watford they were using paper notes when I was there, so they were like looking for paper notes a lot. A lot of things sometimes things don't get done, so you have to you do spend a lot of time chasing things compared to Singapore. And I think a lot of them mentioned that you can locum. Locum rates for Watford were quite good, like I think 40 to 50 pounds for F1. And I think F2 you can negotiate depending on how their manpower constraints, and there's a protected teaching time also. So it was quite well balanced. So I do recommend it as an experience if you can. Yeah, so I'll just talk about each of my postings. So general surgical training, FY1 is mainly clocking new patients from A&E together with the registrar. So you're very guided. You don't feel like you're like thrown into the deep end. You basically just go and see the patients together with the registrar. And then you manage the unwell patients on the ward. But if you have any questions at all, you can ask the reg, and they'll be there to kind of give you advice or support you. You get to assist in a lot emergency cases in EOT, but it's much less compared to Singapore. I feel like because of CPOT and the working hours, there are much less emergency operations, and maybe some operations are more urgent in Singapore. So I'll be doing when I was doing general surgery, I was doing appendectomy like through the night, and IND through the night. So we just operate like nonstop until like from like from 8 a.m. to the next day 8 a.m. We'll be doing lab appendixes like at 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., and 5 a.m. But I don't think this happens that much in the NHS. Like I think they wouldn't do a lab appendix at like 4 or 5 a.m. They'll just do it like maybe 8 a.m. the next day. So I guess theater time you get more exposure sometimes in Singapore, but you do get a lot of exposure as an F1 in Watford if you're interested in surgery. The Regis let you come and assist in all the Hartmann's operation, and I think for orthopedics, they do pay locum rates over the weekends to cover the OT as a locum also. So you do get theater time if you want, and there are always people that are not that surgically inclined, so you can sort it out with your colleagues and get theater time. Weekend ward cover can be quite scant, so you get less manpower over the weekends. And I think, as Zhang Yi said, you get one registrar, one MO, and one registrar, one house officer, and one SHO to run like all the gen surg patients, which can be quite less manpower compared to Singapore. You do for Watford we did on call, so we did I'm not sure whether it still applies now, but we did like 4 nights in a row or three nights in a row, and then we had on call time also, and you get theater time. Oh, and we get to go for like surgical courses. So that one picture of me is like practicing microsurgery with the loops. Okay, so yeah, and I really enjoyed hematology also. Given a lot of chance to help manage the hematology chemotherapy patients. So whenever they're having an allergic reaction or anything, the nurses would call me as the F1 to review them. But I also got the chance to do a lot of hands-on procedures. I think my reg supervised me doing a lot of the bone marrow aspirations and other hands-on procedures also. And I think Chang Yi already touched upon this, there's an on-call take. So when you're on call for general medicine, not hematology alone. So we clerk patients with like the bread and butter medical conditions such as community-acquired pneumonia, UTI, or cardiac failure. And then for the ward cover, there's a handover sheet for the weekend. So the handovers sometimes are not very good because some of the F1s would say like trace these bloods, but they won't write a plan. So I think that can be improved. And then you'll be managing unwell patients also during the ward cover. Yeah. Okay. And then I really enjoyed my psychiatry posting. That was my psychiatry consultant and my colleague. So we basically clerk like psychiatry cases, and I think I had a lot of independence as a psychiatric FY1. I basically when the consultant's not around, then I could lead the ward around and talk to the patients about why they were there every day. It's more chill. It's not like a proper ward round, but it's just talking to them about how they feel and reviewing their medications. You'll be managing a lot of medical problems yourself, because the nurses are not trained medically. They're more trained to be psychiatric nurses. And you have a lot of multidisciplinary input from the occupational therapists and physical therapists. I was in a really nice psychiatric hospital. Like none of the patients wanted to leave. There was like pet therapy on like Mondays. Tuesday they brought patients for manicure, pedicure. Wednesday you can go shopping, and it's like NHS provided, or you can make your own smoothies with it's really good. I think everyone was very it was very hard to discharge patients there, but you feel very well supported, and they even gave us like a few martial arts training to like learn how to defend yourself if the patients turn aggressive. Yeah. Okay. All right. So yeah. That's fine. Non-work related, I had a really good time in London. There are like fantastic gyms, amazing food, and I get to travel. The pictures are from my mess, so that was the mess night, and some of the balls that we had. Transport wise, I drove to Watford from central London, so it's about 45 minutes, 1 hour. But I was fine with like traveling that distance, and I think it's an amazing opportunity if you can stay in London. Application pathway, I'm not sure it has changed since my times, but you can choose the academic foundation program, or you can just rank on Oriel. Yeah, and I think there are quite a few questions, but I can just talk briefly about like the 3 main questions. The first is like, how would you compare working in Singapore versus the UK? I think both are great. Singapore, I think a lot of people talked about the shift system. So I'm doing I right now. I think I has a good balance. Like my working hours are 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. But I do a lot of calls because it's very subspecialized and a lot of people are not trained to do eye. So I do like 8 calls a month. And sometimes if people call sick, I do like 10 calls. And the calls are 30 hours. So sometimes it can be quite long. But you get to rest during your call sometimes, most of the time, but sometimes they are very bad calls. I think for me, like the work-life balance was quite good. It's quite clinic-based and yeah, it starts slightly later compared to other specialties. But when I was doing general surgery and general medicine, started quite early, like there's pre-rounding in Singapore. So if the rounds start at like 8:30, then you have to round before the consultant sees the patient. But I think if you're fast and everything, you don't have to come in that early. Like I didn't have to come in before 7. Yeah. What will the transition be like if you plan to head back to Singapore after working? Working in Singapore, you get to claim for your calls. I think in UK, you don't get paid for your calls. So if you do like 8 calls a month and then you get it's 300 for a weekday and 500 for a weekend, it's actually okay. And then what will be the transition like if you plan to head back to Singapore after working in the UK? I think the transition is slightly, it will be harder if you come back as an MO. It'll be hard adjusting to the system because it's quite fast paced and they use a lot of acronyms, but I'm sure that most people will be able to adjust within like three months. So it should be okay. And the working culture is definitely different, but everyone's still very friendly and I'm really, I'm enjoying myself a lot now. So why did I choose to work in the UK? Also, I did UK because I wanted to stay in the UK and also get the license. And then I went back to Singapore because of my family. But both are great options, so you can't go wrong both ways. Yeah. Okay. All right. I think I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ang, for sharing your experiences of working as a FY1 in the UK and how you chose to return to Singapore as a MO. Your insights into working in the UK compared to Singapore are also very interesting and is very helpful for many of us, I believe. Next, Next, we have with us Dr. Anthony Ng. Dr. Ng is an academic specialty registrar in intensive care and respiratory medicine in the East of England Deanery. He is currently undertaking a PhD in the immunology and cellular biology of the critically ill septic patient, funded by the Wellcome Trust at the University of Cambridge. Dr. Ng has always been keen to participate in medical education. He has an associate fellowship of the Higher Education Academy and has taught undergraduate physiology, pathology, and biochemistry in various proportions since 2011. He has a significant interest in clinical teaching, most notably point of care ultrasound, where he is a faculty member of the Regional Multimodality FUSIC course. Dr. Ng is an ultrasound mentor in echo and thoracic ultrasound and regularly teaches these in the ICU. Dr. Ng, please.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Andrew. Can you guys hear me all right? Perfect. So just a quick disclaimer. I'm not Singaporean, so I'm a bit of an imposter here. But my family live in Malaysia. I lived in the region for 4 years before coming to do my medical training here. So I am I do have significant ties to Singapore and Malaysia, and the question about whether to move back or not has always been one of the things in my mind, given actually all of my family are now there, but for personal reasons and otherwise, I've chosen to train in the UK. So as Andrew said, I'm an intensive care registrar. I work in the East of England. I trained at Cambridge. I'll tell you my training pathway during this talk. What I hope to outline is really more in broad terms what training in the UK is like. And again, it's very difficult for me to turn around and tell you what training is going to be like for each individual person. So I'll share my screen. Hope you guys can see it. The difficulty with me telling you what training is going to be like is one, I'm significantly older than probably everyone in the room, and therefore my training pathway has been very different to everyone else's and will be very different to everyone else's. But importantly, the thing about training is, when you're in it, but it's quite a difficult thing to explain to people. It's one of those things like if I showed you that map, which is quite old now, all of you would probably know, and I imagine everyone's been to London, you weren't there in 1908 to look at the tube map, but you know it's the tube map. I can't explain to you what this tube map looks like. But what I can tell you is that actually, you know, this is kind of like training. You know, you've got a sort of bit where everyone goes to when you go to London for the first time. When I was here, certainly you go to Oxford Circus, and then you kind of take the tube around central London, and it's pretty small. You can take the Circle line, you can take the Central line, you can take the District line, whatever, right? You see central London, you're in zone 1, and that's where you spend most of your time. That's kind of like F1 and F2 training, right? You see all of the same places: medicine, surgery, psychiatry, you know, orthopedics, and you get a little bit of experience, and you dabble a little bit in each different bit of, you know, sort of medical practice. And it used to be very simple, right? You used to, broadly speaking, you operated, you did a physicianly specialty like respiratory or whatever else. You might do psychiatry. There were very few specialties and very few special training pathways kind of, you know, 20, 30, 40 years ago. Life was pretty simple. You did 6 months as a medical SHO, you did 6 months as a surgical SHO, and then you did whatever you want. You dabbled in a lot of things before you decided what you wanted to do. And then in 2022, with the addition of the Elizabeth line, this is kind of what training looks like, right? Yes, there is central London, there's zone 1, but my God, there's every other part of London you can go to, and they're all quite far away, right? I don't know who's been to Brixton or to Morden, although you see the tube lines go there, right? But once you get to Morden, it's impossible to get to Watford Junction without going back through the centre of this. So the thing is, the tube map is kind of like what training is now, right? You sort of do have, again, and I can hear from the people who are F1s, F2s, CT1s, this insightful sort of discussion around what this central bit is like. London is very different than 1908. We have 2 world wars and a lot happened, including the Olympics. But it still sounds like it's the same place, if that makes sense. There's still the same difficulties, and it still sounds more or less like actually people do get a wide breadth of experience. And I think for my junior colleagues who are sort of in the room, they've reflected this, you know, landscape of sort of training in the UK at the moment, which probably hasn't changed very much in the ethos of it, although the execution of it's very difficult. Lots of tick boxing, you know, lots of inefficiencies, which again, we can reflect at the registrar level. And then you get to somewhere like me, I'm kind of in zone 3, right? Intensive care is around here, respiratory medicine's around here, and they do have some common crossovers. And therefore, I've kind of picked those 2 specialties, a physicianly intensive care specialty, to sort of train into. But it would be difficult for me to jump into anything else. So I'm not going to describe your specific training pathway to you, because it'll be very different by the time you reach it. But what I will say is that actually there's a wide breadth of different places that you can train into now, subspecialties of cardiology, subspecialties of surgery, right? Which line you take and how you get there is a convoluted pathway that will be individual to you. Although there are defined training pathways, some are fairly straightforward, some are slightly laterally moving. Just remember that actually the most important thing is to enjoy the ride. Bringing an audiobook onto the tube is the kind of equivalent, right? If you sit there and you stare at the wall for an hour, right, it's going to be boring. If you enjoy the ride is what it is, and you'll get where you want to eventually. My own training pathway has been pretty straightforward, unfortunately. So I was at Cambridge as an undergrad from 2008 to 2014. I've been academic the whole way through. Initially, I wanted to do oncology, and I took up an academic foundation program in oncology in 2014 to 2016. My final year of medical school in F1, I realized I quite liked seeing sick people, like very sick people, you know, the acute cases on the ward, sort of really sick, hypoxic, hypotensive patients. That was what got me up in the morning. So I really enjoyed those out-of-hours acute shifts. I like being stretched to my sort of academic, intellectual, medical, and I suppose own comfort zone potential, and really quite enjoyed sort of taking care of those multimodally sick people. And then kind of had to make this jump where I said, my entire portfolio has been oncology. That's all I've really wanted to do, and didn't quite know how to get into the care of the sick person. So I did the easy thing, and I just jumped specialties ever so slightly and took up an ACF in respiratory medicine, driven purely by the fact that I had a really nice rotation in F1 for respiratory. Quite enjoyed the specialty. Went to interview, and they said, and if you were successful, what would you like to do? And I turned around and said, this is an ACF in medicine. Oh dear, I don't really know what respiratory. And they gave it to me, and that was fantastic. So I did 3 years as an ACF in respiratory medicine, and met my current boss at the University of Cambridge, where we put a project together, had 3 months essentially a year to do basic science research. I do very much basic bench work, molecular biology, immunology, cloning, all those kinds of things you'd have learned in biochemistry. And we put a project together to start a PhD in intensive care medicine, sort of essentially with pilot data. And that's the way that a lot of the different foundation programs and academic clinical fellowships will work. They either work as they give you a few months a year of protected research time where you formulate your own projects to build up pilot data for successive applications. And they can, although they are competitive, they can be really useful because they give you that protected and shielded, not only physical, but intellectual time to be able to explore your research interests, write papers, read papers, because that takes intellectual sort of bandwidth, I suppose. But then we put that program together. I then went and did a sort of year as an intensive care sort of and respiratory registrar in Luton, which was significantly changed by COVID-19 edition 1, first wave, as it were. So expect, sort of surge ICUs and the rest of it you will have heard of. And then I started my PhD in 2020, and I'm currently 2 years through that. I've got about 10 months left. And then things that I will look at in the future, a clinical lectureship, which provides 50% research time, but of course is significantly more competitive, and eventually to start my own research group, and probably about 5 years left of specialty training. I can't comment on other systems, although I have explored actively sort of other parts of the world, Singapore, Malaysia being one of them, but also thinking about things like the States, Canada, Australia. And our training is significantly longer here. Whilst that can be a very negative thing, and I think a lot of the things in medicine and surgery, a lot of the training can be very service provision heavy, it does change significantly when you hit registrar level. And I think what I've heard from my junior colleagues is that actually, and this is probably a bit of a shame, that opportunities such as operating opportunities or the care of very sick people is diluted at the F1, F2, CT1 level. But what I can guarantee you is that it then makes its way up to the registrar level. And when you're a registrar here, you will be managing a lot of different cases in your own subspecialty by yourself, essentially, with a consultant at the end of the phone. So for example, in some of the intensive care shifts that I do, I'm the most senior intensivist in the hospital with my boss remotely available to come in if we need to. So whilst at the more junior level, I agree that actually there's so much more service provision. It's such a shame, really. As a registrar, the training here is fantastic. And I'll go into a little bit more about why intensive care is a great specialty and kind of the kind of things that I do during my training later in the talk. So the critical care, intensive care medicine is the care of the critically ill patient from any specialty, major organ system support, cardiorespiratory, renal replacement therapy. Again, with COVID-19, we've seen a lot of respiratory support in the last few years. And also the patient at risk of deterioration. Think about the hematology patients with high volume aggressive tumors who are receiving chemotherapy and likely to tumorize and deteriorate from that side of things. We watch them as well. A lot of the perioperative high risk, sort of major abdominal surgery, AAA, NELA pathways, we managed post-operative care and actually optimize that care for high risk, high reward surgeries in patients who may not necessarily receive that on the wards. And also thinking about sort of our interface with the other specialties in the hospital, intensivists manage sick people from all specialties, and therefore we run around the wards and outreach teams and try to prevent deterioration as part of a really important sort of component of our job, not just intensive care within the unit, but also intensive care within the hospital as a whole. And thinking not just about the patients who are sick and need to come to ICU, but those patients in whom actually early and direct palliative care might be useful for, in people with multimorbid or terminal and intractable diseases. I love that interface with multiple specialties. We see anaesthetists in our theatres work. We go down to ED, surgeons, medics, O&G occasionally. But actually, basically, any adult specialty falls within our remit. And therefore, actually, there's this lovely and social interface in the hospital I work in, where actually I know a lot of people from a lot of different teams. And actually making friends in hospital is often a good thing to do, because actually it's the difference between making that referral at 2 a.m. to the team you don't know versus picking up the phone and saying, "Hi guys, we saw you last week. How can we help you? You guys can help me." There's this lovely procedural to cognitive balance in intensive care. So as an intensivist, I'm fully echo trained, fully thoracic ultrasound trained. Anything you can see with an ultrasound probe, I can get out with a needle. It's the question of whether you should is a different story, but actually, if you can see it, you can poke it. But we also do a lot of different procedures, things like central lines, chest drains, especially in sick people, actually, you quite often don't have the time to wait for a specialist to do so. And therefore, actually, we're procedurally reasonably adapted, have a good amount of hands-on stuff, but also a good amount of things like practical application of pharmacology and complex drugs to sedate people, to jack their blood pressure up, to support their respiratory system. And we can manipulate physiology in ways that can allow our patients to survive long enough to get better. There's this incredible focus on the patient, right? We have an incredibly high doctor to patient and nurse to patient ratio. It's 1-to-1 on intensive care. And therefore, I feel like we can give our patients the medical, but also the personal time that it takes for them to physically get better, and for their families to sort of get their heads around the critically ill patient. It is a very difficult time for anyone in critical care. And I feel that in our specialty, we're able to provide a lot of sort of dedicated time to these patients to allow them to take them through this journey and actually see them through not only the intensive care stay, but the aftermath of that. So the recovering or the persistently critically ill patient, we see these people in clinic afterwards and support them and their families going forward. And lastly, actually, intensive care is a ripe research field in basic science, trials, and multiple other different domains. There are so many different areas of unmet clinical need that we don't really understand in the sick person. Actually, a lot of the physiology and stuff you guys are learning, a lot of the immunology, all of those kinds of things have been done in well people. But actually, in critical illness, all the rules go out the window. And until we understand this, we won't be able to provide that care for our patients. And I think research is a really important part of advancing that patient care. This is a horrible picture of me that ended up in the Financial Times because of an article that in the Department of Medicine, they came and did something, and therefore took a picture of me pipetting colored liquids into other colored liquids in small tubes. But actually, everything from bench science to translational science to trial science is important to filling gaps in the field. And I think, being a researcher, yes, it is really important for applications. Yes, it is really important. I don't personally, our field doesn't require you to have a PhD to become a consultant. I'm doing this purely off my own skin, but actually, doing research provides you insights into gaps in the field and allows you to sort of look at the field and questions in there and clinical presentations with equipoise. You'll be taught so many things at medical school. If you hear an ejection systolic murmur, it's going to be aortic stenosis. The louder it is, the worse the aortic stenosis is. Right, look for a collapsing pulse. All of these things that if they're there, unambiguously, there is a diagnosis. But your patients come in all shapes and sizes and complexities and blur the lines between these very defined sort of diagnostic criteria. And realistically, what you find is that the older you get, the more equipoise there is, and the more ambiguity there is, and actually understanding where the evidence is and isn't can make you a better clinician overall. Research is not just there to make our CVs better, it's there to make us better doctors. And there's so many different flavors of research. I love bench science, and therefore I do bench science. But actually qualitative research, thinking about, sort of observational surveys, clinical research, all of those things are really important. Even sort of socioeconomic research into medicine probably is more impactful than what I do. But there are lots of different flavors. It's like picking ice cream at Baskin & Robbins. It's just a matter of what you actually like to have in your cone. Work-life balance is very difficult. It's topical, and it's a good thing that it's topical. But again, hospitals, staffing levels are highly variable. You are like Sisyphus pushing the rock up the hill, and it just tumbles down the other side. And then you come back to the rock at the beginning of your shift, and off you push. The hours can be long. They're probably not as long as in places like the States, Canada, Singapore, Malaysia, and Asia, but actually even a short span of hours, because of the doctor to patient ratio, can be quite tiring. So whilst I think we don't do as many hours as my colleagues in other countries do, we have probably a higher burden of work for those hours. I wouldn't underestimate it. So as an intensive care registrar overnight in a 1,000-bed hospital, I can count the number of shifts where, in the nicest way possible, I haven't had time to stop. The flip side of that is, because I love the specialty I do, the hours I do are less laborious. I come to work and I really enjoy the work that I do. I want to come to this shift. I want to go see those sick people. And if you do something you enjoy, the hours might be difficult and the rest of it might be a bit busy, but actually it's not, it won't be as impactful on you as a person. Different regions have different training experiences. You may be in under or overstaffed hospitals. I worked in a hospital with paper notes for a lot of my sort of training, and they are very difficult versus where we have Epic, which is much better. at the hospital I work at the moment. But the other thing that's important is that actually variable working and flexible working, like less than full-time working here, is very well embraced and well accepted. And well-being and sort of personal care and work-life balance is becoming a more prominent part of our discussions as a training body nationally. And I think going forward, that's quite important sort of for people who want to defend that to a greater or lesser extent. Lastly, applications. I'm not going to tell you about your individual applications because they'll be very different, but what I would say is it's good to be good and do lots of things, but it's better to be deliberate. Seek out those training matrices that sort of essentially tell you what you need to do. Don't waste time on things that do not fall into that training matrix. You know, Zhang Yi showed a very nice sort of set of these things saying, actually, this is what papers do for you. This is what you need in your application. First author papers, 10 points in this. Right, find what your specialty training matrices are, fill them properly, keep everything that you have as evidence, and don't waste your time on things that don't count towards your application, right? You want to be sort of dead in the middle of this application. The random project that doesn't really fall into that, don't do it, right? Make sure that you weigh the merits of your projects and teaching opportunities against what you already have in your CV. Don't duplicate, and the flip side of work-life balance is, yes, take time to yourself, but you make your own luck, and therefore actually, hard work pays off eventually. And that's really sort of all I have to say. I have a lovely work-life balance, aided by 2 cats and a lovely wife who is sort of probably taking care of them at the minute. So there you go. I think that takes us to the questions, doesn't it?
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Ng, for your talk on your specialty training journey. And I felt that your your advice was really useful. Yeah, so we'll
Thank
now
you.
be moving on to our Q&A segment. So I think we'll go through the Slido questions, and if any of you want to submit questions or upvote, you all can just go to Slido and do it.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. So we also have today with us Dr. Jeffrey Lim. So he graduated from St. George's Hospital Medical School in London in 2005, and he began his foundation training in the UK in 2006 at St. George's Hospital in Brighton and Sussex University Hospital NHS Trust. Then he did his core surgical training in Oxford Deanery in late 2007. He proceeded with higher surgical training in the Severn Deanery and has completed a pelvic oncology fellowship in the Swansea Bay University Health Board. He was appointed as a laparoscopic, colorectal, and general surgery consultant and is currently at the Great Western Hospital since 2017, the Shelbourne Suite since 2019, and the BMI Ridgeway Hospital since 2020. He's a father of 2, and his wife is a clinical lecturer of pediatric nephrology in Bristol. So he's great. I'm very grateful that he's here today. So he'll be in the Q&A session as well. So one of the top upvoted questions was, do you think it's easier to obtain specialty training, clearer pathways or criteria in the UK compared to in Singapore?
I'm just going to say one thing about specialty training in the UK, which is probably quite important for everyone in this room who is not a UK citizen. We are all subject to the resident labour market test, and therefore actually one of the things that is difficult about applying for specialty posts particularly is that actually if the post can be given to a UK citizen and of equivalent standing, essentially that's legally enshrined as preferential. So the way that I did that was actually I'd been in the UK for 10 years by the point of applying for intensive care training, and then got ILR and then applied for specialty training because it would make my chances easier to get sort of a comparable post. It's just a semantic point, but it's important for all of us because I don't think any of us are UK citizens in this room.
Yep.
I think, didn't they remove that criteria like last year or 2 years ago, such that everyone, regardless of citizenship, has the equal opportunity of getting into specialty training?
I didn't realize
from-
that. Thanks, Jengi. I didn't realize
from
that.
my
Jengi.
understanding, I think they
Yeah.
changed it because I think
Yeah.
doctors are on the list of like shortage occupations.
Yeah, so it
Okay,
doesn't
shows-
matter your citizenship anymore.
Can you guys hear me? So,
Yes.
Yay for Brexit, that's why. But however, as Anthony will tell you, Brexit has done irreparable damage to research of everything. I mean, Tony, you're in research. You should know all the partnerships have been destroyed.
Yes, absolutely. The research funding is drying up actively.
So I think when you applied for specialty training, we were still second-class citizens.
Yeah.
We aren't anymore. The kicker is that, how do I put this? Many of the Singaporeans here, or overseas students here, by a Darwinian process, are kind of what I like to say as the best of the best, sir. You know, they're already driven, they're already here. So I've never really found that when people want to get into specialty training, there's a problem per se. I'm not saying the people who are back home are any worse. It's just that the people who stay on here are even more driven. That's all. But the last time I was at one of these things, what happened is that Mr. Lim just monopolized the talk. So I'm just going to keep really quiet unless someone actively asks me a direct question. Okay, so.
Well, I'm not in training just yet, but every single training has their own portfolio scoring that you can look to and score. And I think like Dr. Ng has said that it's quite good if you have a certain idea of what you want to get in, to look at the portfolio and make sure that you start taking off the points. Yeah, I'm not sure whether the core trainees have, Dr. Koo, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I agree with that. I think they all have quite clear kind of application criteria that all fall into like different categories inside, research, audits, and it's pretty much quite similar across the board. So I think it's not a bad idea. Just have a look at it, I guess.
Wilden is misrepresenting me. There's nothing wrong with Huddersfield, all right? I have no idea where he said that from. I mean, to get specialty training, it depends. Everything is so different now. And the numbers change all the time. Is it easy? And the problem is that at home, it's becoming harder to get into specialty training. And here it changes. For instance, so Hui Fen, in the bad old days of 2005 or the early noughties, the number of jobs to trainees for general surgery was 1 to 17. You had to beat 16 other people to get a job. Now it's for general surgery, it's 1 to 5.
I've heard less, but yeah.
Less.
Yeah.
Less, really.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So it's the question to ask yourselves, I guess, is do you want to stay on here? I would feel the career and doing things to get specialty training, that's kind of secondary. Or put another way, the people who want to stay on here, they will get what they want. They're driven, they're young, they're dynamic. The question is whether that's the right thing for you based on the lives of these young trainees here and how things are. And that's why, don't ask me too much about that. It's what you see in Zhang Yi, Tony, Hui Fen, what you want for your life in the future? Yes, then that's what you should be asking yourselves.
So I have to admit, as a very significant conflict of interest as well, being mid-training in the UK, one of the biggest attractive things here was the academic background, and also, for personal reasons, my wife and I have a house in Cambridge. Why not? I am also looking at spare parachute plans, because actually the look of how the UK has been since Brexit has changed things very significantly from when I first started here in 2008. And it's worth considering whether what you see now is what you want and what you think is going to happen in 5 to 10 years' time is what you want, I think, is the short answer.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. We have another question, I guess, for Dr. Jolanda Ang. of how fast you can start residency in Singapore?
Oh, sorry. Hi, sorry. Yeah, right now I'm not a resident. I'm still a medical officer. So not in residency training, but I've done all my eye exams, like part one. And most of the time, if you want to get into like a competitive specialty, they recommend you getting your exams done before that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I have a really important question. Is Jolanda outside Plaza Sing? That looks like Plaza Sing.
No, it's Sheraton, sorry.
Where are you?
Sorry, Sheraton.
Sheraton. I thought so.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. But with regards to residency, it's the same in Singapore. So they look, it's less a point system, but you need to look at your basically your experience, and they would like people in more competitive specialties to spend a longer time, so you get to know the department well. And then after that, they also look at your exams and qualifications, and then research is a plus for them mainly. Yeah, but the interview panel differs according to different specialties. So for I interview, it's mainly like asking about your interests, because most of them know you already. But I heard from my friends that were doing general practitioner, like family medicine. They actually had OSCE stations for their interviews, and they asked them about their interests, but also they had like actors come in and test their communication skills, and also how they would handle kind of difficult situations. So a lot of the clinical medical school kind of OSCE communication, breaking bad news came in useful for the interviews for them. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. And one question addressed to the floor was, would it be possible to apply for specialty training together with your partner? And if it's not, how difficult is it to be allocated to the same location in the UK?
From what I know, you can only apply with your partner if both of you graduate, and only for foundation training, so not for specialty training. So you and your partner will have to make the discussion of where do you want to go, and both people have just to try their best and leave somewhere in the middle. And yeah,
I think to chime in, sorry to interrupt, but to chime in for that, I think if your partner and you, the person who gets the lower ranking, they will give the lower rank. That's what I've heard, but I'm not sure it's changed for now. Yeah, so it's quite risky.
Yeah, that is correct. So I have a friend who applied with his girlfriend, so he got the lower ranking, and both of them got put to where he got in for foundation. You can link application for foundation, but not for specialty training.
Okay, Ryan sent a message for Dr. Jolanda asking how relevant the exams done in the UK by MRCS are for ophthalmology, and then FRCO.
So I did both MRCS and FRC Optel. I did part A and part B, so it is relevant in Singapore. They require we still have to pass part A and part B MRCS, or for Optel we do part 1 and part FRC Optel part 1 and part 2. But on top of that, we also have our own exams every year on top of it. So it is relevant for now, yeah. But they were having discussions about the future, but right now it is relevant for your training, and it's a part of the training pathway. You have to pass your exams, same as the UK.
Okay. Then another question was, would you recommend doing a run-through training program or going through the traditional ST3 route when applying for a specialty?
Well, as far as this year is available in the UK, there are no run-through training program besides those we can traditionally run through, like neurosurgery and cardiothoracic. And if you're talking about surgery, every other surgical specialty, you have to do the core surgical training before applying to ST3, at least for this year. They kind of stopped it when COVID came around, and I'm not too sure when they are going to restart that. But run-through training is still available. If you want to go to places like Scotland, they're still available. Yeah.
Well, I thought that because obviously the new shape of training has happened, a lot of specialties still have their core training things that have been changed. And now specialty training, a lot of the programs are not run through anymore, bar a few which have still existed as run through, like obs and gynae, for example. The one caveat to that is if you do an academic training program that starts in CT1, so an academic surgical or medical specialty, you get an academic run-through number, which is one kind of way. It's obviously can be more competitive depending on the region, but you tend to get an academic number, which then sort of confers you that run-through number in training, but that changes between different regions.
Okay, thank you. I think Will Bin also asked, he's interested in doing a clinical fellowship. Would you recommend doing a PhD during medical school?
I've asked him to email that one so that I can give him a more comprehensive breakdown offline. My broad thoughts on a PhD is everyone's got a slightly different time they want to do it. Some people have found the MB PhD is very good because it fits into, and a lot of the A-star guys do an MB PhD as a matter of standard, is my understanding. But actually, there are broad advantages to doing a PhD earlier. You get it over and done with while you still have the energy to do that. But doing it later actually confers you a slightly more independence clinically to collect samples, recruit patients, and whatever else, and often finds itself in a bit of medicine that you're already interested in. But if anyone wants to email me about that, I'm happy to discuss it offline.
Thank you. And the quick question was about the pay scales. Someone asked if it's before or after tax.
That was my take-home pay.
Okay, great. Then to Dr. Jolanda, if you were given the chance to change something of your medical journey thus far, would you have changed anything or left things as they are?
I think leaving it as it is. So it's a good balance, and it's great to have a UK experience and you get your license and you enjoy the whole London exposure. But then in Singapore, you get the training, is really on-the-job training and a lot of teaching also. So I would have stuck to it. I think making it compulsory for international graduates to do both general surgery and general medicine gives me a really strong foundation also. Even if you are interested in other specialties, having this grounding lets you manage like sick patients in like high dependency units, and so I would but I think both ways, like every option works, like, just like all the other speakers have said. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And then there's a question about how would you find conferences that provide prizes or oral presentations?
I think picking conferences is sort of, there are multiple different things you have to think about, and I think the bigger thing to think about is whether the research you're presenting is relevant, because it's then more likely to appeal to the audience that you get and actually be amenable to any of those prizes. But the internet traditionally is quite a good way to do that.
Yeah, what I have done is usually you do like an audit or research paper with a consultant or a registrar. So most of the time they are quite in touch with what conferences are available, and they would recommend you if they feel like the presentation of the project is worthwhile doing a presentation to ask you to submit an abstract to it. And some other ways is that once you start working as a doctor, you tend to get internal circulations of internal conferences or conferences in the region with regards to certain specialties, and you can just submit an abstract. But yeah, like Dr. Ong has said, the internet is a good way to search up as well.
One thing to be really clear about when I was talking about targeting where you present your work and stuff, a lot of the specialty training application matrices will ask whether it is a local, national, or international thing, and they will actually define what is meant by a presentation at a conference. So in a main theater or in a sub theater of the conference, for example, in intensive care applications, you get different points for that. And those conferences that are more well known, it'd be more easy to define that this was a keynote presentation versus a sub presentation versus a poster presentation. So it's worth looking into the intricacies of that, because a lot of these applications will require you to actually prove that in order for you to get those points. And that might be bringing a conference program, for example, that says this is in the main lecture hall versus otherwise. And if you miss that nuance, you won't get the points.
Yeah, for course-eligible training, they would say it's presented at a local meeting or national meeting or international meeting. They come with different number of points. I think just a quick one, I was looking at the poll, it says the updated person specification do not have a point value attached. That is not the portfolio. There's just a document saying what are the things that you should be doing if you want to get into training. There is a specific portfolio with the number of points that's attached to each achievement.
So one of this thing about research and publications and presentations, I want to be very careful about this because your consultants and registrars, your consultants particularly, are still of the era where an MD was required and publications just to be a surgeon, which I think is personally, it's got pros and cons, obviously. But a lot of people are now moving away from research for research's sake. I've stopped going to conferences because I feel bad. It's now almost, I mean, ASGBI is almost populated by med students and trainees. As a consultant going there as a louter, you see like, don't know anyone here and I feel a bit bad. Conferences and papers, that's why you try and touch base with like Zhang Yi or Anthony or Hui Fen about what to do, you know, where to look for and what to submit. But the key thing is you don't have to be a superstar on that. You can kill yourself trying to get a national publication. I mean, Anthony will probably tell you some PhDs don't even result in one publication. You know, that's seen as a lower quality PhD. I disagree, but that I don't dish out the funding at the Wellcome Trust. The point being is that you just need to be above average in every aspect of your portfolio. You can kill yourself getting into Cell or Lancet. I know someone who did. That just earns you, what, the maximum 2 points? What about the rest of your selection criteria? What's your management? What's your audit? What's your logbook? What's your dedication to the specialty? So yes, get your presentation, maybe get a publication if you want, but don't kill yourself in getting that. Case reports are now on the way out. We can talk ad nauseum about the paradigm to open research, which I think is wrong. Now a lot of places are asking to pay to publish your research with little peer review. That just strikes the wrong balance to me, I think. However,
I have to
yeah, go on, doing yeah.
I have to admit, I think the drive to use publications as a key selection criterion has made the academic community and probably a lot of the physicianly community uncomfortable because it results in essentially dilution of key research by people putting research out for the sake of having a first author publication, and it puts undue burden on trainees at a low, at more junior levels, because actually it doesn't really prove that you're going to be a good surgeon, medic, intensivist, whatever else. It does make me uncomfortable, and it is on the way out. So a lot of curricula are now trying to look at research engagement as opposed to publications, because they know that the two are disconnected. One thing I would say for anyone who is wanting to go into academic medicine is volume is not necessarily a correlate of academic prowess. And when you publish something, make sure that your name is against something that you are happy being published. If you walk into an academic interview, your research will be not only assessed by the kind of quantity, as it were, which is what everyone else does, but by the quality of that research. And a bad publication in an obscure journal that is not very rigorous will actually count against you when you're applying to an academic specialty. If you've got 20 publications, none of which are of any scientific sort of benefit to the community, actually that will count very heavily against you versus one very good publication, if that makes sense. And it's not about the prominence of the journal, it's about the scientific impact of the paper itself.
Wilden, what do you think is a Mickey Mouse journal? Where do you get all these phrases from? I hope you're not repeating after me.
So like what I'm doing like this research with this cardiologist right now, and then he keeps saying like, he gets like advertisements to become like a peer review for these Mickey Mouse journals. So he said like actually some of these Mickey Mouse journals are good because like publishing to Lancet is so hard, right? And like someone may steal your idea just by publishing to a Mickey Mouse journal. So
True. But
Yeah,
when you say Mickey Mouse, do you mean one that's indexed on Scopus?
like low impact factor, I guess.
Impact factor, I mean, Tony can probably talk ad nauseum about how stupid impact factors are. In fact, that's going to be a question for Zhang Yi and Hui Fen when you come for your interviews. How do you calculate impact factor? And what are your thoughts on impact factor, young trainee? You know, and then be wary, because last time I went off going off on one about how stupid impact factors are. One of my interviewers was an editor for the British Journal of Surgery, Jonathan Earnshaw. Boy, that was embarrassing. But just to give you an idea, up until a few years ago, the Singapore Medical Journal would have been considered a Mickey Mouse journal.
Yeah, to be fair, I think
doesn't-
now like impact score factor of 6, which is not bad.
Well, I mean, the impact. Anyway, look, we're getting away from it. The
Yep,
point
yep,
being
yep.
is go like what Tony said. It has to be a good quality. It can be an obscure journal, but when it's obscure, just because it's obscure doesn't mean it's a bad journal. So long as it's indexed, peer reviewed, and you are proud of your research. That's something which I'd like to tell all of you guys. I'm just pointing to Hui Fen where she is and Zhang Yi. Whatever line you have on your CV, you have to be able to give the elevator pitch. Now, do you guys know what the elevator pitch is? Zhang Yi is enthusiastically nodding his head. So the elevator pitch is essentially every line in your CV, you should be able to talk at least 5 seconds about it or summarize it in 5 seconds. People always say 1 minute, but have you ever tried to talk about something for a minute? It's an uncomfortably long thing. Okay, most elevator rides are designed to be 5 to 10 seconds. So if you talk about something which even to you sounds stupid, it'll become pretty clear for what you've done that is stupid. You see, if you're proud about talking about it, then put it in your CV. If you're not proud about talking about it, don't do it. Don't get into it. You know.
I think the thing about research and again impact factors we could discuss ad nauseum. H indices we could discuss ad nauseum. What is important when you come to these interviews is that your research has integrity. That is, it's been conducted in a rigorous fashion. It's got an important question, and actually that that you have had an active part in it. That you understand the research behind it. The big red flags for me when I'm looking at sort of applications for things are people turning around and saying, you know, I did this research and then not being able to talk about it, that's a big red flag. Not being able to show its relevance is a big red flag, or not being transparent about the way the data was collected or processed, that's a big red flag. All research that is clinically relevant is good research wherever it's published, as long as it's done rigorously. And I think a lack of rigor is probably a bigger red flag than the impact factor of the journal that you publish in. If it's we've all read papers in low impact factor journals that are very useful for a specific thing that we're doing. I do it all the time. It doesn't,
Anthony,
it doesn't, yeah.
Anthony, when you say everyone, I think that's really applicable to you. Maybe the rest of you read lots of journals, but I think a lot of them, remember, they're med students, okay? They're not going to be doing CME every week. And Hui Fen's looking very guilty now. So no, you don't need to do that.
I've got all the
Just
time to do
qualify
it. No, I should qualify. We will all at some point need a paper that is in a low impact journal, but maybe highly relevant to something that we are answering. Just because of the impact factor, you shouldn't discredit the research if it is of good integrity and relevant for what you're looking at. And that's what you should be bringing to the table, really.
Okay, thank you for the discussion. In terms of time, we will probably have 10 minutes to into. And this is all recorded, so we'll be sending it the link to
Pingjing, can I just say, before we finish, one thing which I've been speaking to Zhang Yi and Hui Fen offline, we've become less and there are more of you guys now. So I've just put in a WhatsApp group invite because I'm trying to resurrect a postgrad WhatsApp working in the UK chat group. It's mainly for postgrad, but medical students can join in to ask the juniors what they're. I mean, there are more of us consultant surgeons than we know. Yeah, that's all I'll say. And if guys, when you're listening to talk, please, I mean, join, introduce yourself. I'm not here to pitch it. It's just because the previous SMSUK, I thought we developed it into something, but there are more important things to develop. So for now, all I'll say is join the WhatsApp and you can ask people questions. And one thing which I've just realized is that it's probably quite imposing to ask strangers questions for help, especially Singaporeans. Oh, good Lord, all us Singaporeans, the one thing that we can't do is ask for help. It's like you'd rather die than ask for help. The point being that there's more of us around than exists. The group is heavily surgical based only because Mr. Lim has really only kept in touch with some surgeons. I'm sure there are medics around like Tony and a few others, but join if you want, ask questions if you want. With Zhang Yi, like I said, join that group. There's a hand and wrist surgeon, Saka, who would be quite useful for you to chat with about how to advance things, and Hui Fen, like I said, I've asked Clarissa and Kieran to get in touch. Yeah, really. I mean, guys, if you want to think about working in the UK, it's not so much to working in the UK, it's more living in the UK. Is living in the UK where you'd like to be? Our job here, as Tony and Zhang Yi and Hui Fen have talked about, we've got a better work-life balance. But one thing which is really harder is that everything else that a lot of what makes us Singaporean is harder to do here. You want to go out for makan? Good Lord, you got to plan, you got to come up with a Google Calendar and plan months in advance. You want to meet up easily. You want to do things. You want to have the what really we do a lot in Singapore. We don't really do that here. But then again, the people who stay on here self-select for that sort of lifestyle. Yeah. Anyway.
Thank you for that. And that's what SMSUK is for too, trying to build the community. We also hope you guys come to our future events. And
Yep. So we've now come to the end of our talk. On behalf of SMS UK, thank you so much to everyone once again for taking the time to join us this Saturday morning. Finally, some of our speakers have agreed for us to share their slides with you as well as their email contacts. So if you like, just ask us. As we strive to improve our events, filling out our feedback form by scanning the QR code that's shared right now or visiting the link in the Zoom chat would be greatly appreciated. We would love to know your thoughts on how informative this event was for you and how we can better deliver relevant content to you all. A big thank you once again to our wonderful speakers. Thank you, Dr. Zhang, Dr. Khoo, Dr. Ang, Dr. Ng, and Mr. Lim for being with us today. And we wish you all the best in your careers ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.